Florida Governor Ron DeSantis responded to former President Donald Trump yesterday over his COVID attacks on him. Let's listen.
I think he did great for 3 years, but when he turned the country over to Fauci in March of 2020, that destroyed millions of people's lives. And in Florida, we were one of the few that stood up, cut against the grain, took incoming fire from media, bureaucracy, the left, even a lot of Republicans, had schools open, preserved businesses. And so Florida, since COVID, has outperformed virtually any state in the country. When people look back, you know, that 2020 year was not a good year for the country as a whole.
This comes after Trump said DeSantis, quote, didn't do well on COVID. He had more deaths than almost every country in Florida. I hate to say it because Florida is my state, but he did not do well, while appearing on the Full Send podcast last month.
DeSantis also slammed Trump for the debt numbers throughout his presidency.
We're $31 trillion in debt, and he added almost $8 trillion in debt in just 4 years as president.
Mom and dad are fighting. This is, I don't know, it's kind of funny to have him be like, oh, well, he raised the debt so much during his presidency. And then Trump to say, well, like, DeSantis killed a bunch of people in Florida. The numbers were really high. It's just like they were on the same team so recently that it's just weird seeing them fight like this.
It's so classic, though. I mean, anyone who goes against Trump pretty much is going to get this treatment. Although I will say, obviously, DeSantis is going to get it more aggressively because he's pretty much the only legitimate threat to Trump winning the nomination in the Republican Party. But I would say if you're Trump, you should try to stay away from the COVID stuff because that's the one area where I think Ron DeSantis actually kind of has him beat in terms of conservative policy because Trump did disagree with Fauci on the idea of closing the border from China early on in the pandemic. But he pretty much outsourced his pandemic policy the rest of the time to Fauci, whereas DeSantis had beaches open in Florida and schools open within a couple of weeks, maybe months on the school front. But he keeps trying to say, like, oh, DeSantis did a terrible job on COVID and comparing it to New York. That is like the worst comparison you can make because New York was a nightmare. By the end of the pandemic, Florida was outperforming New York in pretty much every category. There was the huge nursing home scandal with what Governor Cuomo did with trying to put sick people back in nursing homes with the most vulnerable populations. So I just don't think that's a winning message for Trump. I think what he should do instead, I was talking about this with some friends last night, is if he wants to maybe give DeSantis some credit for his COVID policy, but say, that doesn't make a president. Instead, I would be happy when I win the nomination and win the election to appoint you as my NIH director.
That's interesting. I think DeSantis probably shot himself in the foot when he decided to lie about the COVID deaths in the country. I mean, he had his own state auditor look at the numbers and say, yeah, you said that there were far less deaths than there actually were in the state of Florida. I think DeSantis needs to answer for that at some point in his bid for the presidency because yeah, he can make fun of Trump for liking Fauci, right? Their base hates Fauci. So whenever he mentions Fauci, it's like, oh, well, Trump, had Fauci in that last year. That's going to hit for the base. I don't think that's something that either of them should be fighting about because it seems that it's going to piss off people on all sides of the political spectrum because of both of their history handling COVID. The debt thing is really interesting because you're right that they don't say their plan or like what's their side of things. It's just, he's DeSanctimonious, he's Meatball Ron, he did this, he did this. It's like, when are we going to get what your plan for the country really is beyond Make America Florida, which is the most absurd slogan ever. But we really need some kind of policy platform from either of these two guys.
Yeah, I mean, I would say DeSantis is probably doing a better job at articulating what he would do as president. But the issue with, I think, the whole Republican nomination process right now for Trump specifically is that a huge part of his success in 2016 was that he was running as an outsider and he was able to point to the Republican establishment and say, here are all the things that I think they're doing wrong. Here are all the ways that I think they're hurting the American people, particularly the working class. Here's what I'm going to do differently. We're going to basically change the Republican Party from the inside out if I get elected. And he did that to some extent. He had terrible decisions in terms of personnel and who he surrounded himself with in the White House that made a lot of his agenda really ineffective. conservative. But now he basically is the establishment. He has the RNC paying his legal bills. He was, again, already in office for 4 years and failed to accomplish a lot of what he said he was going to do on the campaign trail. DeSantis has a proven track record in Florida. The fundamental difference I see between these two guys is that DeSantis is not a good retail politician. He's super awkward. He's like kind of autistic. He can't talk to people on a personal basis. I mean, I don't know if you saw this video of him going to like a pizza shop or whatever, and he's trying to shake hands with people. He asks the guy what his name is, and his response is not nice to meet you. It's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, like, come on, have like a little personability. And Trump is entertaining. He's funny. He's able to talk about, right now, like the big thing in the Republican Party is anti-wokeness. Trump is able to talk about it in a really funny, easy to understand way. DeSantis is kind of wonky on it. And when you're talking about a national election campaign, the presence really matters.
DeSantis can't meme in the same way.
Right.
And I think it might be intentional, right? I don't know if this is a situation where I'm like, oh, well, Trump is so funny and willing to say whatever, and that gives him the upper hand. But also, it's a primary, not a general. So what's in my mind is DeSantis giving himself the upper hand by saying, I'm not going to stoop to that level. I'm going to be the predictable professional guy who plays by the rules. Who is someone who likes a candidate that plays by the rules? The leaders of the party, the establishment, people with money and power, they want someone who plays by the rules because they write the rules. They want someone they can control. And so if he wins over people with power and influence, I mean, Elon Musk seems to be in his corner already. Seems that the party establishment, the Republicans, would like DeSantis over Trump because he's predictable and controllable. And so they could rig the primary in his favor. Primary elections are not regulated by the same election laws as general elections. It's considered party business. So what the party leaders want might matter more than what's popular with the public.
Yeah, there is definitely this perception among certain parts of Trump's base that DeSantis is the establishment candidate. And I think they have a point, because when he was talking about launching his campaign, one of his first meetings was with major donors of the party as opposed to a grassroots type rally. He launched his campaign on a Twitter space with Elon Musk, who he presumably is trying to groom to donate to his campaign or support it in some way, as opposed to doing the typical speech in Iowa or New Hampshire. He made it more inaccessible for people who aren't super online social media nerds. So it's weird to me that he kind of simultaneously is attacking Trump for being the insider now because he was going along with Fauci and all of these other public health bureaucrats, while also making a concerted effort to court the GOP donor class as opposed to building grassroots support, which he has plenty of that he can build off in Florida. But it's hard to maximize that to a national scale. And that's going to be his biggest challenge. According to people I know close to the campaign, DeSantis is a huge micromanager, and you can't operate like that when you're talking about a national campaign. It just doesn't work. You can't constantly be in every meeting about which specific ad buys you're going to have in South Carolina, right? That is how that kind of campaign just falls off the tracks really, really quickly.
Yeah, Matt Gaetz was trying to tell DeSantis, when you go to these campaign events, write "be likable" at the top of your page. It seems he's thrown out all of that advice.
I don't know. Does writing "be likable" help, though?
It's like, be likable. If only I knew how to be likable.
Right. That's kind of like an innate, intrinsic thing. I don't think you can teach that.
No, not at all. He doesn't have that.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this.